then I went on hiatus for a little bit when I had my first daughter, and then I came back as the head coach. So, and then I'm also the new novice coach at the high school. But I also competed from 6th grade through high school in a lot of different events. So, but coaching the junior high level has been an eye opener. So.
Well, I'm Kathryn Anders. I am the head coach for Warsaw Community Schools. Originally started a middle school team to have a feeder program into the high school program. And this will be my 5th year coaching as a head coach. I was originally from Plymouth Schools, graduated from there. Megan and I graduated together.
Mm-hmm.
So we found it beneficial to kind of transition now from both being competitors now to both being coaches, just kind of setting up the expectation of what each level of competition is going to include. I think this is going to be a pretty eye-opening experience when you think about the mentality of students and kind of what we're expecting them to do. I think this is going to be a really good program and kind of what setting up the expectation of what each competition level really does entail.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so having said that, looking at that teenage mentality, why are teenagers insane? Why is it that high schoolers who are brilliant enough to checkmate us in 10 measured moves can remember to walk the dog before can't remember to walk the dog before running off for a night of reckless lunacy with their manic friends? By 16, our children have attained adult ability and logic. So what's their excuse neurologically? Katie, do you want to go on with that?
So, Francis C. Jensen, I did a couple of research where it shows that about 80% of a high schooler's brain is on their way to maturity. So there's still about a 20% half-baked dough lingering in a high schooler's brain. And so a lot of the times that's where we find the folder for homework assignments and e-learning days and matching clothes. So when we're thinking about it in a speech level, we're going to be considering what does that have to do with each level of competition. A study published for the Journal of Developmental Science indicates that a high schooler behaves far more recklessly when their friends are watching. So if you put a group of students in together who are good at doing different characters or good at being very dramatic, let's put them into a speech round as opposed to a party environment, and let's see how it plays out. So when we do have teenagers, we know that they do stupid things and we just have to excuse that. But I think that we can get them into an environment in the speech mentality where it's going to show, hey, let's do as many characters as we can and see if we can impress our friends.
Okay, so middle school, is that 6th through 8th, and their ages 11 through 13. That's young. I mean, they're still pretty young kids. And they're also, the maturity level is just very, very low. I love this image. I love the second one with the young man who looks like he is smelling his armpit, because that is like, in a nutshell, what a junior high student is in my mind. That is their biggest concern. And their concern is, do I look, smell, am I acting weird that's going to point me out so that other kids are making fun of me? So their confidence level is really low. Their peers' opinions are really important. So Katie asked, would you give me a simple description of what middle school speech competitors are? Looking at how they perform, what type of pieces are they performing, how is their practice mentality? And some of the responses we get are are honestly, they're very different, and it can be because there's a lot of factors that play into that. Where are you practicing? How many kids are there at once? Are you having the entire group of drama kids at the same time? Are you doing one at a time? How structured is that environment? So Jeannie Malone, who is in charge of the junior high level with IHS FA, yes, she says that a middle school competitor can be almost any student in the middle school. It would be hard to peg a profile. There really is a huge range. Some students participate because it's an extracurricular group, others because it's extra credit for their language or lit classes. That's not how it's set up at my school, which is, again, another one of those factors that play in. There are teams with a 20-year history and programs that are just starting. Concerning their mentality, practice, and material used, again, a very broad spectrum on all counts. Most teams use selections from their current literature, and they practice before and after school, which at the junior high level, you really don't have that competitive speech built into the curriculum very often, if ever. So it really does become extracurricular before and after school. Sometimes I'll catch kids during advisory. So strong middle school programs have strong leadership, starting with a coach who places a high value on the activity. The coach in turn recruits volunteers from parents, college students, high school students, community volunteers who help listen to the students. And then she said, that said, many programs run on one coach, and the more experienced members listen to the rookies. I think she meant that the other way around, that more experienced members, then listen to the younger kids. So it really is a community effort at the junior high level. I feel like it's, we have a coach here. There is a head coach position, and there is actually an assistant coach position, which it makes it very nice. I have that ability. Outside of that, we really do kind of lean on volunteers. And in the current situation, having people in isn't nearly as easy. So setting that up will be a challenge, but looking at those older kids to come and coach the younger ones, the peer coaching is very good.
And looking through that, I mean, the slide will be available. So we have several different people who have made comments on what they think middle school is. Jeannie's is a really good one to look at because she is head of the Middle School Association for IHSFA. So looking at hers, you see that there's a lot. But we could kind of skip through, like there's lots of other ones. So it would be easy. It would be really nice that if you wanted to compare on your own time, you could really compare all of these different things, which leads us to believe that there's not one cookie cutter middle school program that's really an example of what a middle school program should be. I think each have kind of catered to their own school, which is nice, but we can't necessarily say which one works better than the other. We want to give you the expectation of what we think, what we think a middle school team is going to bring to your school.
Yes, and there are a lot of things and values that come from it, and that again, in these, when you take some time to hopefully go through those, you'll even see that, what are the values of it. So, and they're very different. But all of them do tend to say the kids are a little goofier, and getting them to focus in is a little bit more difficult. And the season's quite a bit shorter. So at least here.
Right. Yeah. And typically, I mean, just from what I ran into, a high school speech tournaments, you're going to have one almost every weekend, especially in coming down from January, February, March. You know what I mean? Those months. But with junior high, you only have about 4 to 5 tournaments, honestly, that your team will go to. So they don't have a very big glimpse of what, the world of speech is actually going to be. So
you're also, the way that it is set up with the 3 rounds, we don't break to finals. There is no break to semis and break to finals. It's just a 3-round run. scores are added up, and then the lowest score is the first place ribbon. And we typically double ribbon depending on the size of the meet. If there's not that many kids there to begin with, we won't always double ribbon, but we do tend to double ribbon so that more kids are having the chance to be up there on stage then at the end to get that experience.
So if we go down to the perks of middle school, I think this is really what it kind of sums up. Megan, if you want to go through that, or I could.
Yeah. So the perks of being a middle school team member for the students, and this is, what are the positives for the students? Because that's ultimately what's really important in the programs from 6th grade all the way through 12th grade. What is the benefit for the student? So at the junior high level, that middle school level, we see positive friendships get formed, which is awesome. The introduction to public speaking, even if it is a short and smaller type of introduction, becoming familiar with tournament structures, the 3-round, and then going and catching something to eat between the rounds. The very basic parts of what a competition are, they really get to experience at least a few times. And if they do, all the way through middle school, they get a few chances at that. Finding their groove, if they are taking the opportunity to try different events so that they can kind of see where they fit and where they're comfortable. Inclusion, honestly, anybody can do this. They could be the best athlete in the building, and they could be, the worst athlete in the building. Anyone can be in speech. Positive feedback, they're getting some response to what they're doing, and they get some positive feedback. Memorization skills go up, which is really important. They have fun. The group that I have, they really have a lot of fun. And none of those perks include pressure or competitive elements. So that's also, they don't have that all those nerves necessarily. Some because they're scared, but okay, next.
So novice competitors, the definition of a novice is all students in their first year of high school competition, regardless of prior experience, are eligible for novice division. That means all 9th graders are eligible for novice divisions, whether they've done a middle school or not. So I included a whole bunch of faces here, and it just shows you now we've equipped these 11 to 13-year-olds with a variety of facial expressions. And once they get to the novice level, they really start to say, hey, I know that I can use these in more than a 5-minute speech. If you want to go on to the next one, Megan.
Yep.
Urban Dictionary, which sometimes it's just fun to go on Urban Dictionary and define. It gives you a little bit of a different definition than your Oxford Dictionary would. One who is inexperienced at someone who performs an action relatively poorly due to inexperience, lack of skills, or insufficient training. Can be applied to people of any age, which means you could be a freshman all the way up to a senior, but most often used to describe someone young. If a young person performs an action with relatively great amount of skills, despite their lack of experience or training, they are known as a prodigy. So I think it's funny. My daughter is a junior, and she came home the other day and she said, "This freshman, this newbie," and I said, "What are you talking about?" And it was really this somebody who's new at high school, didn't know how to walk on what side of the hallway, and it was funny to me because she called her a newbie, and I thought that was the perfect description of what a novice person is. So I have a couple of testimonies from people who competed in their first tournament, and kind of what, even if they were in middle school, kind of what they felt. So the first tournament, I dreaded it. As I walked into the building, I only knew a few people, and I just wanted to go home. I was super nervous, but then my brother and some of his friends I did know started introducing me to new people. I ended up enjoying the tournament very much, and at the end, I ended up being sad it was over. I did a complete 360. So you could just see how, they have those reservations still, but they do become comfortable. The next one, if you don't mind. Did there have any embarrassing moments? My embarrassing moment thing happened my novice year when was during my first speech round ever. As I was giving my speech, I changed directions, moving sideways, and my heels got stuck together, and I kind of fell into the table. Tips for the new girls wearing heels: practice unless you want to fall into a table like me. You know what I mean? I saw somebody said, well, they probably meant 180. Yeah, these are teenagers, so I didn't correct their grammar, but I just thought it was funny, like these embarrassing things are happening, and they're still trying to grasp what a speech meet is. You know what I mean? But this person said, "What would I take away from the first year? What would I take away from being a novice?" I made a number of great friends my first year. One friend in particular, I even spent time together over the summer, even though we lived in different states. I met people from all over the country this year when my brother qualified for nationals and I went to watch. All in all, my novice year was one for the books, and I highly recommend. So, despite having these little slip ups and not really knowing what you're doing and kind of like slowly progressing into what you want to do, I think it's nice that people are kind will get into their place. The next one, please, if you.
Sorry.
Okay.
Presenting again.
With the black Chrysler Pacifica with new license plate
Sorry.
that is parked in the teacher's lot, please
So,
move your vehicle.
novice,
SMI is coming.
Sorry, let me mute so that.
Thank you.
so novice competitors, everyone has going to have their own first year experience. The point is for them to everybody starts, everybody starts the same way, and everybody has to kind of learn and figure out what theirs is, but everybody, I haven't had very many people who would say, you know what, it was just completely terrible, it's not for me. And I just thought these two little these two little memes were funny. Teenagers in suit everywhere. One of my freshmen last year said, "Oh my goodness, they all look the same." So it was just like a sea of suits, which is nice. Now, Megan and I compared what we thought our novice year expectations were. Novice can benefit just as much from competition as varsity. So even though they're not as competitive, they're still going to be learning that there's going to be a competitive edge once they get to a little bit of a higher program. A novice has no reason to expect any performance milestones at their first meet. I think they're just going in with the expectation. I hope that I don't make a fool of myself. A novice who enters their first competition learns important information about the structure of meets and how they respond to the pressure of competing. So now we've stepped up from middle school where now there's this pressure of competing, right? Which isn't what they had at middle school level, right? We also have a transition from middle school to high school, how they're dressing. I think middle school, we're just excited to get them there. But novice, now we're expecting them to kind of dress a little bit nicer. I don't think that we're going to hold them to the same standards as a varsity quite yet. But I think that they're going to learn that looking around in the cafeteria, that this is definitely something that they need to think about a little bit more. And the novice students are definitely going to start looking up to their varsity peers. So Megan, your expectations for novice, you believe?
Yeah, one of the biggest things when it comes to novice for me is that they're having a good time, because building the foundation that yes, speech is a competition, yes, speech has opportunity, and it is really, really good for you on so many different levels. One of the biggest things is, especially early, is that they're having a good time, and they're seeing that just because it's an individual events and things like that, they can still meet new people and have a good time. So understanding that speech, what it is, and finding their zone, what is speech, finding that area, especially the ones that didn't have middle school. But even once they hit high school, there's some more options, there's some more expectation. And so they may find that while they liked humor at middle school, they don't like humor at the high school level because it's harder. Understand how to carry themselves and to recognize the value of not only speaking, but the value of networking and that forensic community. Again, it's so unique to speech to have those opportunities to network with like-minded people, but also, they're so intelligent and they have such good conversations. And so I think that's a huge value. And then gaining comfort and the ability to speak in front of crowds, albeit small crowds on occasion. And then a freshman, honestly, and this is a big portion of the what we are speaking about, is that a freshman could become varsity in the same year that they're novice, but a senior could be novice and never become varsity. So does there need to, what's the expectation there? What is the qualifier?
When does a novice become varsity? It really varies by school. And at the end of this session, I'm going to open up to kind of a group conversation and see what each school does. And I kind of want to lean towards should there be a one rule standard, or do schools like that they have their each individual way of transferring their novice to varsity? I looked at the IHSFA website and it doesn't say anything except when it comes to sectional and state. So my novice versus somebody else's novice transfers is completely different based on school. A novice, until you earn a certain number of NSDA points. So are schools in the state of Indiana that once you have earned over 150 points, then you become varsity. So they have their students participate in novice until they've reached that point. Novice until December. And then over Christmas break, the coach picks out which novice stop for the year and which novice competitors then continue on. Some are more advanced novice are asked to transition to varsity for the January postseason competitions. So when does your school make that transition? If you just keep that in the back of your mind, my school is a smaller school, so I know that my numbers look different than somebody else's. If you have a lot of people and don't want to cut people, of course you're not going to bring over as many novice if you have a huge amount of varsity. But how do different schools differ, and should there be a universal cutoff point to say, you know what, you're waiting until 150 points? Is that really what a novice person is? If you'd like to go to the next slide. The transition to varsity. So now we have talked about the novice portion. Now we're going to say you can kind of what each person is experiencing. So the coach, just be honest and professional in dealing with the students. You know that you don't want to hear that you're cut, but it's better to be open and honest about why they're being cut. If there's something an underclassman needs to improve upon, tell them. If a senior who just isn't talented enough to help the team during that sectional season, tell them. It would be a tough conversation, but being blunt and honest is the best way to move forward. Now, we could just have an end of the year awards for the novice and just saying that the novice season is complete, but their novice peers are going to see that some of those freshmen have made the cut. So I know it's going to be a difficult conversation, but if you are honest with these students and saying, these are the things that I was looking for, these are the things that I would like for you to work, because honestly, there's no junior varsity like there is in sports when it comes to speech. So there's no transition to where, somebody's almost good enough for varsity, but they're not novice any longer. So we don't have a junior varsity. So we really have to make it clear of what we're expecting when these kids transition to varsity. And talking with parents as well. Cuts are probably tougher on you, talking to parents, than your kids or the coaches. In the past months, I've seen various Visions of the same sign floating around the internet that read, "Your child's success or lack of success does not indicate what kind of parent you are." But having a student that is coachable, respectable, a great teammate, mentally tough, resilient, and tries their best is a direct reflection of your parenting. So just because they didn't make the varsity team doesn't mean that they failed as a parent or the student has failed as a speech competitor. We just have to work together to say, you know what, we're going to be working on these things, and these are the things that we're going to try to improve upon. And then the next time that they come, it's gonna really help them make it to the varsity team. So it's really hard because you have to have these conversations. And I don't know necessarily, I mean, having a end of the year awards banquet for your novice is really explaining why they didn't make the cut. Competitors, how will they respond being cut from a team? I think it's fair to assume that you would be sad or mad to some extent, depending on your level of commitment to the team. Getting cut from the team is much like being assigned a smaller role on the team. Isn't you know, isn't meaning that you're less of a person, but it's how they react that will share volumes as they are. It's really just showing that the competitors, if they're willing to say, you know what, you're right. I went to tournaments. Maybe I wasn't putting in 100% and I didn't make it to varsity. We really need to set that expectation of what our varsity and novice we want. And then you have to think back to the mentality of these, maybe they're 14-year-old, they're just coming out, maybe they have about 90% of their brain mentality back, and they still have 10% of that mush just still floating around. You know what I mean? We just have to kind of coax them into, you're not quite there yet. If you're an underclassman, will you actively seek ways to better your skills that you're lacking? So that's really the next step. Is you have a novice member, do you expect them to excel or practice or do something that can encourage them to get better? Maybe attending speech camps during the summer, or maybe working with a vocalist coach, if they are, wanting to get a better range of characters. You know what I mean? So it's just things like that. I'm not asking any student to go spend tons of time and money, but if it's going to help them and they want to commit themselves to the team, would it be worth it? If you're an upperclassman, can you still actively support the team in some other manner? Can you lend your knowledge to the younger teammates to improve their abilities on their experiences? So, you may have upperclassmen who have moved on, or you have a freshman who has moved on, and maybe they can take the other freshman under their wing and say, you know what, let's work together so that next year we're both on the varsity team. Okay, Megan, would you like to take this for a little bit, or would you like for me to continue?
I haven't gotten to work a ton with varsity, so
okay, I'll continue. That's not a big deal. Okay, varsity competitors. Okay, so we what we did is we said that novice were first year competitors, right? Or according to your school, maybe under 150 NFL points. There is no definition for novice, varsity, or middle school speech competitors on the web. Let me tell you, I spent hours looking. So, in my opinion, varsity is a seasoned and experienced competitor. Next one, if you could, please. Synonyms for varsity is first strings when you come to sports, right? And they're the starters. They're going to be the ones that are going to start your varsity team, right? They're going to be the ones who you see at sectionals. Linda Alt said varsity is anyone who can compete, who competed the previous year, right? Next one. Carol said competitors who have been to competitions know basically how to navigate numbers, critiques, and reading a schematic. The competitor will have had practices sessions with more than one coach. So right there, they're both from the same team, and they both have a different vision of what a varsity member is. Varsity is second plus years of competition too. And he does see and use the graduation of this. So maybe his school is on a point system, or maybe they haven't been in that event, so he puts them in novice. So you can see that we are, then again, have this little bit of a mushy area of what we think a varsity and novice competitors are.
Well, and that one tracking, I mean, when we talked about this, that sounds like a tracking nightmare to me. You know, you're varsity in humor, but you're novice in prose. That just to track that would be crazy. Now, as a coach, you know, like if they haven't experienced like then they obviously need to be coached more. But does that genuinely make them no longer a varsity competitor because the competition portion they do understand?
Right. Evan Elliott, after one season of a student is considered varsity. So here's another, so he would be in agreement with Linda Alt, who says that after, that your second year, you're considered varsity, you moved up. Okay, the next one, please.
Sorry.
That's okay. Okay, so expectations for varsity competitors. Can you use the opportunity to become a better, stronger person for the future? So all of these characteristics are transferable skills for the adult world. So when we're thinking about it, so what we're teaching them is to, make themselves better, to step up and be a better person. All of these things that we are expecting these kids at a varsity level, it's leaning to me like you're coming up, you're an upperclassman, you are, you're going to graduate soon. Is what you're doing making you a better person? And I think, like fundamentally, when you're speaking better and you're able to interact with people in a grown up manner, and you're dressing up professionally, and all of those things really do have do play a part in them becoming a more successful adult. Playing the part, professional, confident, polished, charismatic, compliant, and respectful. Those sound a lot more firm compared to middle school and novice. People are no longer finding their place. People are expected to come to practice. People are expected to dress professionally. People are expected to step into a round and represent a school. There's a lot of more pressure for varsity competitors to say, you know what, this is really what we expect from you. And so we kind of put a lot more pressure, but they also have a lot more to gain, being able to go to nationals, being able to go to state, being able to travel to different tournaments, possibly out of their state. I wouldn't want to take a middle schooler who has a 20% of their brain still mushed around and have them explore a college campus. The ability to commit to a routine of practices and improvements. So by varsity, you are expected to sign up for practices or assigned practices, and you are expected to improve. That means that if you have a script, you are expected to memorize it. If you have a character working, if you are developing a character, you are supposed to be improving that character. There becomes a lot more, you will do this, as opposed to, hey, let's try this, when you become a varsity competitor. Perform your best at each tournament. I know that teenagers have an off day. You and I, we were all teenagers. We remember that one time we could have done something better, right? But we are hoping that when you're jumping on the bus to come in the morning, that these students are wanting to perform their best at each tournament. And if you're not getting, a placement, what is the reasoning? Is it because of practice, or is it because of not of something that you're doing differently, or kind of what the expectation is? If you're doing your best, and you feel that you're doing your best, what can we do to get you to place? And they should be having fun. I mean, they're doing this so that they can be around their friends. But at the end of the day, you don't really see varsity members really going there just to sit down and play card games. They're really going there to compete and do their best. And ultimately, speech is for conquering the public speaking fears, and that's what even our mission statement for the IHSFA is to enhance students' public speaking skills, and so that's we are ultimately trying to accomplish that. Um, if you would like to go to the next slide. So this is kind of where I want to open it up to a couple of other people. Should Indiana have a novice is only a first year mandate? Feel free to unmic if you'd like to. I want to know kind of um, where your school is and kind of how they expect novice and how you switch over and kind of what we think that Indiana should do so that way it's an equal playing field for everybody who's a novice. Well, I can tell you that for my school, because we've had a smaller team, we have transferred almost all of our novice to varsity that same year. We have not experienced, we experienced quite a bit of people placing to go to state. Unfortunately, it puts a lot of added pressure, and we get kind of an emotional array of people who then say they're all so good. So the people that they were looking up to are now people who they're competing against.
I think there are, so I just always kind of define myself, novice, as somebody who's the first year competitor. And that's not to say that a competitor, there are times where I've had competitors who have demonstrated an ability to compete at the varsity level in their first year of speaking.
Right.
And I went ahead and placed them in varsity if I felt that. But I know personally, I have always just expressed, I don't have like sort of the novice varsity levels on my team yet. I mean, it's only my second year, so that's subject to change. But I mean, subject at my school. But I've always just informed my novice competitors, like, hey, I'm going to keep you in novice. And sometimes it depends. Sometimes there are tournaments where I look at that and I'm like, you know what? Like, I think they're good enough to compete in varsity for this tournament because maybe it's a smaller tournament and they have a novice and varsity section, but I go, what's ultimately most beneficial for the team and beneficial for that student, and I might put them in varsity, especially if I think they've got a real shot at, competing for sectionals for a spot to go to state. I definitely want them to see that varsity competition because that is, hopefully what they'll be seeing the next 3 years. But
Right.
One of the things that I think is also true and is, I don't know how you guys are at your schools, but I often have a lot of novices that are juniors and seniors who are just, they've never been a part of speech whatsoever. And they decide their junior, senior year, they want to jump into it. And so that's a balance where I'm kind of like, you know what, it might be best to throw them in varsity because, not to say that they're not on the same playing field, but it's like they don't have as much of a time to show that growth.
Right. What would you consider so a novice, so after the first year, right? So they've competed in novice the first half of the year, you've transferred them up to varsity. At that point, they are no longer jumping back to novice, right? That they are done.
They could. I mean, I don't know. They could. I don't, like I said, I don't have a very strict mandate on that.
Right.
They could. In some tournaments too, you got like some tournaments, like for instance, there might be a whole semester where I only go to tournaments and they don't have the novice varsity divisions, but then come January, I go to a tournament that allows them to compete in novice and in varsity, and then I'll put my first year competitors in novice. So, I mean, I don't have that like clear mandate.
Right.
I'll give you an example. I have a student who last year only competed in like 2 tournaments. And one of them was sectionals, and he placed like 4th or 6th, something like that, made the state. So like this coming year, even though he only competed at 2 tournaments and doesn't have the like NSDA points to really he's probably way further behind others.
Sure.
I would throw him in varsity,
Sure.
because I'm not going off of NSDA points.
Right, and I'm not either. I know that Chesterton does go off of NSDA points, and they have to have a minimum of 150 points in order to become varsity. So I know that's one school that does do it up based off of points. I know there are schools that say, for instance, you have done poetry before, but you have not done oratory before, and so you are varsity in poetry, but novice in oratory. And so I just think that I want it to be I'm just looking to see if if there really is a level playing field. Certainly, I had a senior who joined last year. She started off the first couple tournaments as a novice because she had never done speech before. At the end of the school year, she did join up to our varsity team and actually was on our sectional team and qualified in prose and poetry for state. So it's one of those things that you just, I just like to see what different people are doing. So that way I know what the expectation, and just like you guys, I want you to know what the expectation and what other people are doing so that you can plan your team accordingly as well. I want everything to always be fair and always about the students.
And I think that's the thing is I think that part of the reason why I might, and I know others probably do this too, might have a kid compete in varsity, and then when novices is offered, I put them back in novices because some tournaments have that, like, oh, if you place first at novice, it's 9 points, and if you place first in varsity, it's 10. It's only a 1 point differential, and so they're playing to their team strengths too, and they're saying, okay, well, as a team, I want to put my first year competitors in a chance where they can thrive,
right?
In novice, where they could maybe get sixth in varsity, but they could place very highly in novice. So it's.
And sometimes I think that them being in novice for as long as possible does build their confidence, because if they're successful in novice for a long period of time, they're like, oh, I'm really good. But then you get to that varsity level, and then all of a sudden you are competing against people who are just as good, or, maybe a little more talented because they've had more experience. Then it's like, sometimes you have a small fish swimming in a big pool. So I just always just like to know other people's opinions. So is there anybody else who has an idea?
Yeah. We typically identify, because I'm from Munster. So we have a larger team, and we typically identify like who we're going to be taking probably to sectionals and districts early on.
Sure.
And even with the first year students, even with the novices and stuff like that, and tend to take them, and we'll put them in varsity a little bit sooner, even when novice is still offered, because we're aiming to have them competing at that level. So we'll kind of bump them up sooner, say, hey, this is what you got to compete with, and try to get them to that level a little bit faster.
So do you feel that the novice, currently the novice, it's an even playing field? Do you believe that everybody's playing to the same standard, that the first year you're a novice, and then after that you're a varsity?
It's hard to say, because especially with a larger team, we see a lot of kids who like don't take it as seriously, that are kind of doing it more as a club thing. And then they do it their first year and they have a little bit of success, and they come back and they just get absolutely annihilated in varsity. And then that almost instantly, a lot of times, will just take all the fun out of it, and they sometimes just quit at that point. So it's kind of hard, because there's some kids that are second year, but they don't really have the skills or the dedication even, and they just kind of want to have fun, but it gets defeating whenever you go 666 in prelims.
For sure. Yes.
Right. I think that also, like, commenting back to keeping someone in novice so that they can do well. Are they not rising to the level of competition then because they're the best on the novice circuit? And so I feel like that it's just such a fine line, and it's so student by student, that I think there's some value to standardizing it in some way, but I think that there's also, every program is so different, every student is so different, that trying to standardize it would be more detrimental to some of those smaller teams, especially. Whereas the larger teams, having a standard would maybe make it even easier. You know, with a team as large as Munster, would it make it easier if you're like, well, the state standard is you have to have 150 points to go from novice, because then the ones that aren't taking it as seriously, that maybe don't go to the competitions, they go to just a couple, they go to one every other weekend. You know, those kids, it's going to take longer for them to move into varsity anyway. So your serious competitors are going to do what they can to get those points quickly so that they can be varsity.
I almost feel like when we discuss that, like with the point system, the only detriment I could see is like, you know, let's say you have novices that are going to novice tournaments and they're still not placing well, but they've been to multiple tournaments. Like by their second year, if they don't have 150, it's like they're still in their second year of speaking, you know, and it's, yeah, so I don't know that they would still be considered novice. And I think that's why a lot of tournament hosts say they cannot have competed. And to go back to the point where it was like, well, what if they've never competed in oratory and last year they did poetry and prose? I know that a lot of tournament hosts would still say, well, they're not a novice because they understand the elements of speech.
Right.
And the competition. Like, they understand how to be a speech competitor, even if it's not in that particular event.
Well, we have time. Let's move on to, I want to move on to the next subject, the other discussion. Does your school express the expectations of novice and varsity to your students? I just wanted to see, you know, how do other people approach this, and kind of what is a good standard or a good practice that, you know, maybe a school that doesn't have expectations or doesn't really know where to start. How do you explain to your students, hey, this is what we're expecting from a novice, and this is what we're expecting from a varsity?
Well, I guess we kind of.
Oh, I lost you.
Yeah, we can't hear you. Oh,
there we go. Yeah. I guess we kind of lay it out at our call out meetings. Like, as we're just giving them all the information of like what speech and debate is, we're just like, okay, well, here's what we kind of expect. But if you're looking to compete at a higher level or things like that, then this is what we're looking for. And you're going to have to give up this much time, and you're going to be giving up this many Saturdays and be traveling to these tournaments. So it's kind of, we just lay it out at the beginning.
So then just kind of right out the gate, they understand what a varsity commitment might look like.
Yeah, exactly. Like, what if they're going for our top tier of competition, here's what you got to do. You know, here's who you have to compete with. And, you know, you're going to have to show the dedication to even be considered for that point.
Sure. I know, well, you know, with a smaller school, and we've had success, but with what I expect from novice, certainly you want to get as many people as you can in the door, you know, so, you know, the more you have. And so novice, you kind of set it up with, well, you know, it's a lot of fun. You get to go to speech meets and meet other people, and you kind of set up this, like, this big chart of fun. And then you kind of like, oh, wow. But you also have to be serious. And, like, you know, kind of sometimes you have to like slip that in with, it's fun, but serious. And you have to, like, the undertones have to be there, because otherwise it's just, well, you told us it was fun. Working and practicing isn't fun.
Right. Well, and I mean, finding that balance is important, but I feel like when novice go to competitions, especially at the middle school level, and they start seeing those kids that are the first place, and they come out of those rounds and they're like, oh my gosh, I just saw this kid, and they were so good, and they can tell you why they were so good, and you can just slip in those moments. Well, I bet they practiced a lot. And now you're giving that middle school kid the thought process that to be that good, I better practice a lot. And then as they get to the high school and they're doing novice competition, it will happen again. And the benefit there is There might be a novice competition, but there's a varsity competition going on at the same time occasionally. And so if they don't break to finals in their novice competition, they have the opportunity to go watch a varsity. And I think that's where the seriousness comes from. Obviously, you have to tell them how to carry themselves at meets, which is a middle school expectation for me. But they kind of learn it inherently by seeing the kids that were over there messing around the whole time and acting ridiculous didn't end up on stage. And the kids that are on stage, they had to have put a ton of time to create those characters and to create the piece that they were doing. They had to have put a bunch of time into it. So it's almost self-learned by watching others. So that's when the peer is like really letting those older varsity kids know they're looking up to you.
Right.
Yeah.
So, all right. Well, if there's any questions, we can answer questions. But I mean, I think that we've kind of covered all the topics, and please feel free to look back through. There's a lot of different information that we didn't skip, but we thought you could leisurely look. So.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you guys so much for if you have any questions, feel free to email us. But other than that, thank you so much for watching. I hope you got some information out of it.
Bye.
Bye.